if your top priority really is maintaining where you're at right now, well, first of all, obviously a big congratulations for getting there, because, that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. Now, with that focus on maintaining where you are, really, you've got a couple of options. You could try some of those foods on the grey foods list that I just mentioned, or you could also try some other low GI options, which really cast your net a lot wider, if you like, in terms of food selection. So even still, I really do suggest that you use the rapid fat loss meal template as your base, and then you look at switching or adding things from there. And like I said a bit earlier, have a think about sticking with that meal routine as well, because the overnight fast is important, and so are the breaks between the meals, as is eating a meal completely, because of course, as we know, that slows down your digestion. Now, here are some examples of some low GI foods that you might actually want to consider switching out. For example, for some of the beans that you might have been eating, or maybe, some of the protein portions and that kind of thing. So we'll go through it, and I'll give you an idea, for example, where these could actually be used instead of, or where they might be added to a meal. So the first one is oats. Natural, steel cut oats are a really great option. But start off with a small quantity, because oats, they pack quite a lot of carbohydrates, and although they've got a moderate amount of fiber, they're on the lower GI end of the scale compared to, say, breakfast cereals, but they're probably still not as low GI as eating lentils and eggs, for example. Now, if you're going to have some oats, I still strongly suggest that you look at them as just being part of a morning meal, or any other meal for that matter. They really wouldn't go that far in terms of replacing an entire meal, but what you'd probably want to look at is maybe having some oats instead of the bean portion, instead of the lentils, for example, and still having something that's a pretty decent protein portion with it. So just have a think around those lines, and how you might actually use oats in some meals. Now, other options, of course, I've mentioned cheese already, and really the best ones are brie, cheddar, and mozzarella. There's a couple of reasons for that, but take it from me that brie, cheddar, and mozzarella are, generally speaking, they're the lowest in carbohydrates, and so for that reason, generally they're a little higher in fat, but they're also the ones that are lower in lactose, and so that's why they tend to be pretty good selections. Another option is natural, and that's no flavor, no fruit, no sugar, yogurt. And I know that sounds kind of boring, so you could pair up that natural yogurt with some blueberries, maybe with some blackberries, or maybe with some raspberries. And generally, if you buy this fruit either fresh or snap frozen, you don't actually need a lot of it to get a lot of flavor. So we're talking about probably around half a cup of blueberries, blackberries, or raspberries, and you could bring that in with, say, around half a cup of yogurt, something like that. Now, I'd suggest that this yogurt with berries comes with a meal of some kind. Now, think through the fact that you're getting a little bit of protein with the yogurt, but you're getting quite a bit of carbohydrate as well. Now, these berries are low GI, and natural yogurt is actually low GI as well. So it's the kind of thing that you could have at the end of a smaller meal, for example, maybe, 10-15 minutes after you've finished eating a smaller meal, and it's just going to add in a little bit of extra carbohydrate. So if you're going to think about this, you could add it onto the end of a meal where, for example, you've had quite a large protein portion and maybe a salad with some, good healthy fats and maybe lots of spinach leaves and that kind of thing, maybe even a few nuts, but maybe a meal where you haven't had a really big serving of carbohydrates. And so that's an interesting thing just to think through. You can actually plan a meal that has 2 courses and count those 2 courses together as long as you eat them, within half an hour of each other, in terms of the impact that they'll have on your digestion speed. Now, another option that some people experiment with is adding a fiber supplement, for example, to a whey protein or to yogurt as well. And that's definitely something you might want to consider. The only thing I'll mention about fiber supplements is a lot of them actually get mixed in either with plain old sugar, or they get mixed in with other kinds of bulking agents. So really just be aware of that, and it might pay to ask a pharmacist, for example, or someone who knows their stuff at least in a shop, about a fiber supplement that's quite natural and one that's not actually mixed in with any bulking agents or any fillers or any sugar for that matter, especially. Now, the other thing you probably might want to think about doing is looking at some low carb recipes. Now, I did mention that already, but I want to mention it here again because the low carb recipes really are, generally speaking, great examples of low GI foods. And they're made with people who have some very, very, particular maybe beliefs or some particular strategies in terms of fat loss, but we can actually use them, and use them again as part of a meal. So think about the fact that probably they have quite a high amount of fat in them, for example, so smaller portions probably will be better. But again, if you want to create a 2-course meal around having something like this, something that's baked, maybe with almond meal or flax meal or something like that, as part of a meal, you can definitely build that into a meal. And, that meal can be quite low GI and also give you quite a lot of energy as well. Now, another great vegetable that I really enjoy is squash. So that's definitely something you could think about having. And again, this is something that you could put on the plate, as well as having some beans and protein and another vegetable there as well. And you can experiment with how much carbohydrate you have on that plate, because the squash does bring quite a bit of carbohydrate to the table. Now, the last on this list, and again, it may or may not be available in your area at the moment, but low GI bread is something that I do consider as part of my meals. When I'm actually building a meal, for example, for breakfast, I might include a piece of toast. Now, I know that sounds like it might be a little counterproductive in terms of the lifestyle and, what it's aiming to do. But the way I see it, if I'm having a few eggs and a piece of toast and maybe a small portion of lentils and some spinach, and I'm getting out there and I'm having a big full day and, I'm not going to eat another thing for another 4, maybe 4.5 hours, that's a really fantastic start to the day. And I don't think that that's going to spike up my blood sugar really, because, I'm choosing a bread that's being specifically made as low GI. And so that's where there's a difference there between, for example, regular bread. But of course, you could even experiment with a piece of regular bread with a meal and actually see what kind of effect it has. Really, the main thing with the weight maintenance sort of strategies is that you've probably got a bit of wiggle room. And by that, what I mean is it's a little bit like a thermostat, at your house. And for example, you set your thermostat so that, if the temperature gets down to this low point, the heater kicks in. And if the temperature gets up to this high point, the cooling kicks in. And you stay at this sort of happy medium in the middle, but you're never actually exactly spot on one particular temperature. You're always within a range. Now, that's the way I like to view weight maintenance. And it's up to you to think about what your range would be. And for that reason, it's a good idea to continue weighing and also to continue measuring yourself as well, because there can be other changes that happen that don't show up on the scales. For me, I know that when I'm in a maintenance kind of phase, that is when I'm just really looking to keep my muscle level the same and, I don't really want to gain any body fat, that my thermostat, if you like, my kind of internal barometer is generally speaking around 5 to 6 pounds, around what I expect my weight to stay at. And what that means is that, probably once a week, thereabouts, I'll jump on the scale and I'll just check where I'm at. And if it's more than a few pounds above, or, if it's a few pounds or more below where I'd expect it to be, I know that there's been something going on in my routine or something going on in my lifestyle that's not actually helping me maintain like I'd want to be. It's actually leading to a change that isn't something that I actually want to be happening. And so that's then my signal, if you like. That's my sort of signpost that I actually probably need to just look back over the last couple of weeks, think about what I've been doing, maybe how I've been eating, how much stress I've been under, what kind of my sleep patterns have been like, and actually think about what I could change in the coming week just to correct that trend. And that really is the key to good, healthy, relaxed weight maintenance, is thinking about having that variability, so you're not panicking if you've gained 1 or 2 pounds, but also being able to recognize that if there is a trend that's starting to develop, that trend doesn't come magically out of nowhere. It comes from the lifestyle that you've been living. That is the result of the lifestyle you've been living. And so if it's trending in a direction that you don't want it to trend in, well, that's a good milestone. It's a good signpost to let you know that you probably have to change your lifestyle a little bit to be able to correct it and to settle back down again to where you'd like it to be. So when you're thinking around weight maintenance, you could either stick with the meal routine and, just try different foods, or you could stick with similar foods and try a different eating schedule, for example. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. But the main thing is that you just have a level of awareness that you are trying out different things, and there could be different kinds of results that come with that. My suggestion is always focus on eating meals rather than grazing all day long and rather than eating lots of snacks. I actually just recently learned that it takes your stomach a good sort of hour to actually really start processing food. And so if you eat and then you eat again an hour later, for example, you've got this digested food that's sitting in your stomach that gets mixed in with undigested food. And instead of the digested food moving through you like it should naturally and you getting energy from it, your stomach then has to hold on to everything until everything's digested again. Because your stomach is never going to let partially digested food go further through you, because that could actually be quite damaging for you. So, eating every hour or two probably isn't a great strategy. Eating every few hours, say every 3 to 4 hours, probably is a much better strategy. And also eating complete meals, combinations of protein, vegetables, carbohydrates, that kind of thing. And on that note, I generally recommend to people that they start with a plate and they actually think about the protein first. And then they think about the vegetables, and then they think about the carbohydrate after that. Because sometimes you might just not need much carbohydrate at all, especially if you're adding in some good healthy fats, and let's say you haven't been particularly active that day. Sometimes a really, really healthy and delicious kind of maybe chicken salad or something like that might go the distance. You might not really need much carbohydrate, if any, on that plate. Now, if you are including a carbohydrate, always aim for one that's high fiber. So, even the oats, they're quite low GI, they have quite a decent amount of fiber, so they're quite a good selection in terms of, for example, a breakfast meal. But always aim for that high fiber carbohydrate, a slow digesting carbohydrate, and always think about it in terms of just a moderate quantity. It's not there to fill up the plate.